I'd like to welcome everyone to the Astral Club, the only place on the internet that is solely devoted to the cause of getting more conscious astral projectors on the astral plane. I'm your host, Rick. Today we're going to do something different. I have had a lot of people ask me to have Q&A episodes, and that's what this is. This is going to be Q&A number one. When I first started on Reddit back in February of this year, I posted how I was a veteran of astral projection for 57 years. I thought I would attract a few questions, answer those couple questions, and that would be pretty much it. To this day, I'm still answering questions from that particular Reddit, and it's got well over 1,500 comments right now. And a lot of the folks who have come to support this channel and subscribe are some of my friends from Reddit. So thank you, my Redditors. Um, I'm going to read some questions now. Many of them are from that original Reddit. Some of them are from the videos that I've posted. Hopefully, you'll gain something from this information. The first question is just a general one because it's asked so often. I know I've mentioned this before, but there's 3 books that I think everyone interested in astral projection should read. The first is Journeys Out of the Body by Robert Monroe. That's Monroe. Bob Monroe is I consider him the modern day father of astral projection. I met him first back in the 80s when I took some courses at his institute. He was already well into his 70s at that point. He had this dry sense of humor and this timeless knowledge that just blew me away. And he was a marvelous individual. And his book, Journeys Out of the Body, is the seminal modern day work as far as I'm concerned about astral projection. Number 2, Leaving the Body by D. Scott Rogo. This is a good scientific look at how to astral project. And third is a book that was written about 100 years ago by Sylvan Muldoon. That's Sylvan, Muldoon, Muldoon. And it is Projection of the Astral Body. He also was someone who was a great writer and an actual astral projector. One book I would like to mention, because I know there's a lot of books out there, and for the most part, they're either good, fair, or harmless. There was one book I remember a long time ago I read, and it's somewhere collecting dust on my shelf. It's called Astral Projection it was printed by Llewellyn, which was I don't know, maybe they're still in business. I don't know. They were an occult book manufacturer a while back. And in this book, it talked about astral projection in a very ceremonial magic sense. I'm not sure anyone involved in that book ever actually astral projected. But boy, oh boy, did they have rituals. You have to sit there on a certain time at a certain night, say certain types of magic words, write these pentacles on the floor, sleep in the middle of said pentacles with just the right candles and incense, and oh my goodness. I don't know if that would help anyone else to project. I know it gave me a headache just trying to read it all. And I know if I had to do that every night, forget it. I'd never astral project. Okay, let's get into the actual Q&A section of this now. Question number 1, and this was asked by Matt22123P. And Matt said, what's the effect of allergy meds, prescription drugs, sleeping pills, and opiate pain medication? This is a question that is frequently asked. Anything that sedates you is going to make astral projection a lot more difficult, because the conscious mind is going to have to fight through this medication to get control of the process and then get out of the physical body. I would never tell anyone not to take medication if it's required by their doctor. However, anything that sedates you is going to make astral projection either more difficult, impossible, or you're going to have a difficult time remembering what happened on your way back. I remember once I took a pill called Ambien because I had trouble sleeping. Well, this thing blacked out a large portion of my memory. I woke up the next morning and there was a whole meal that had been made in the middle of the night. I talked to my wife about it. She said she didn't do it. I later found out online that there are people like me who did all kinds of wacky things while on this medication with absolutely no memory. So, be wary of those types of medications if you're looking to astral project. Okay, next question. And this one was written by Lord Jor, bottom slash PY. He said the first and most important, how do you do astral projection? Well, and his really next follow up question was, how do you surpass the fear? And that is the number one reason people have abortive astral projections or have difficulty doing it at all. So I can never really address fear too much. The first thing I want to say is you must overcome it if you're going to astral project. The slightest fear experienced during a projection will either prevent you from leaving your body or will cause you to snap back inside again. How do you do it? Well, one of the things you can do to control your fear is listen to videos like this by people who've done it thousands of times and are relatively sane at this point. Another thing that you can do is, of course, read books like the three that I mentioned there. One of the things that I did to test the indestructibility of my astral body was when I was in space, I decided to fly through the sun. I talked myself into it. I said it was kind of like fire walking. The people who run across those little hot rocks in places like Hawaii. So I figured, well, either it's going to work or it's going to be over pretty quickly. So I projected right through the sun and I did it very quickly. I still have memories of what I saw that were just, I couldn't describe them if I tried. I wish I was an artist. Then I could actually depict what I saw. You're going to also see occasionally some scary things in the astral. But, you see scary things when you walk around New York City at night. Lastly, one of the things I did was to ride a asteroid that was relatively close to Earth, and just to show that, I couldn't be hurt by the vacuum of space. So those are some of the things that I've done to master my fear, and I hope that videos like this, podcasts like this, will help you to overcome your fear as well. Because after all, what is fear? Fear is an irrational animal that is always crouched somewhere in your conscious and your subconscious minds. So you can't get rid of it. All you can do is to help calm it and let it know that it's going to be fine. Next question is by Psych Gamer 2014. He asks, the experiences that you have, is there any way that you validate them so that they're real? They have, they're not just a dream, that they have some sort of existence that is independent and is what we would call reality. I described to him my 6-month 4-digit lottery experiment, which some of you may have read or seen before. In one of my videos, I talked about it. What I did was I decided that I would post the winning 4-digit number with the date on my bedroom door. And what I would try to do is project into the future and see what that number was and the date, and then I would play that number. It sounded at the time to be an extraordinarily easy project. However, it took me 6 months to do it. Staying that close to my body caused me to be retracted numerous times. I had trouble reading the numbers. Eventually, I was able to get it all together and played it, and I won some money, some thousands of dollars. But quite frankly, I didn't think it was worth it. Another time, I got in front of my wife when she was watching her favorite soap opera. She saw me. She saw this smoke that was in front of the TV, and that caused her to actually miss a crucial scene. So when I returned to my body, she was a little bit angry with me about that. Let's see. Lastly, when I'm talking about reality, I think it's important to realize that there's three different types of reality when you're in your bed. The first is dreams, your typical dreams that everybody experiences. And those dreams include, maybe you're at junior high school, you've forgotten your locker, and then suddenly you realize that you're naked, and you wake up and you say, oh my goodness, that was a close call. Another one is lucid dreaming, when you're actually aware that you are dreaming. Now, when you are aware that you're dreaming, you can mold that environment. There was a time that I was actually outside the back of my house, my childhood house, and I was able to impress people standing by causing a gigantic tidal wave to come in, and then I could stop it dead in its tracks. But it's a reality that is only in your head. You can control it because you create it. Lastly, there's astral projection. Now you're traveling through a plane that has an existence beyond you that you cannot control because you do not create it. And that's one of the ways you can try to determine whether your experience is real and that it can be validated based on your knowledge of the nature of reality itself. Let's see, what other question do I want to answer here? Okay, here's one. Just close that. Okay, someone asked me, actually, All Star Runner asked me, when you travel to the future, are you able to see future events? For instance, who's the next president in 2020? Now, when I do travel to the future, I can see some possible future events. And let me explain to you my theory of past, present, and future so that you can understand what it is I'm talking about when I talk about traveling into the past, I talk about traveling present or future. The past is like an enormous river. It only has one major channel now because the choices have been made and we've all agreed that this is going to be our reality. So there's really nothing that can be done to change it. You can see the river, you can watch it flow, but it's set in its course. In the present, you're also dealing with a few different channels now, and we all decide which one we want to call the present. But there's very few opportunities at this point because now we've arrived at what we call the present, so we have to pick and live with our choice. Then we go into what we call the future. The future, picture that like a major river, but now we've got all these tributaries, trillions and trillions of these little tributaries. Some of them are just teeny little creeks, barely any water in them. Others have more water. They're more substantial channels. These are all realities which can be chosen, which can be picked, can be selected. When I travel into the future, I end up following one of these eddies, and then I then see what occurs. So yes, I can see various futures. Some of them will become a reality for us here. Others will branch off into other realities, other dimensions. So, what happens to me when I future project? Well, it's not like the DeLorean. I can't set my exact time coordinates to arrive in a Back to the Future type scenario with Michael J. Fox leading the whole charge. When I project myself to a time, if it's a very close future trip, what I see is a lot of changes happening. The trees, leaves growing, falling, snow, all the different types of weather, the sun going very quickly. However, when I'm going a little bit further down the line into the future, generally what happens is I black out. And I think it might be because there's too many images for my conscious mind to deal with. So I just have a blackout. And when I awake, and that's literally what happens, I find myself somewhere, somewhen. Hopefully my will has projected me to somewhat close to where I want to be. But there's no guarantee of that. In a close trip like 2020, for instance, I will have mere minutes in order to do what I wish to do and go where I wish to go. So, I might end up in a field somewhere in the middle of who knows where, trying to figure out where I am and try to get some information on that. So the chances of me detecting who's going to be the president or the best chance of being the president in 2020 is very distant, which is one of the reasons why when I do travel in time, I tend to travel further down the line because the further I go into the futures, the more time I have and the more ability I have to actually affect those futures. And I will talk more about that in the future. There's one last question I want to ask before I cut this particular Q&A in half. And there'll be a lot more Q&As as we go forward into the future. Oh, you know what? Let me just go back for a second. I'm sorry. Let's talk about trips to the past real quick because I get that as well. One of the more popular ones is, can you go back and see Jesus? Can you talk to him or can you see him get nailed up to a cross? Which I don't know why you'd want to do that, but okay. If I did try to project myself back into the past, first of all, you're talking about around 2,000 years ago. No one's exactly sure about dates in Jesus' life, assuming, of course, that he was an actual individual and not a composite of a lot of preachers that were running around the Galilee area, the Jerusalem area back in those times. So let's say you suddenly find yourself somewhere in some parched area of the world. Hopefully you arrive somewhere within 100 miles of your target, which is harder than you might think it is. Let's say you're aiming for Jerusalem for that Passover where Jesus arrived through that gate. It would be a miracle that you could get there and in the few minutes that you have in the past, because in the past you have a very short period of time. It would be a miracle if you could get within 100 miles and then get to where somewhere in this sea of humanity in what we now call the Middle East, that you could find this one particular preacher, whether he's getting born, executed, what have you. Keep in mind he's very famous now, but back then he was just another madman running around preaching a bizarre doctrine which irritated the Pharisees and alarmed the Romans, who were looking to maintain peace in a very troubled province. Last question I want to answer is by ADM0NI. He asks, what is the best way to control yourself just after you start projecting? The entire control in projection is based on a highly focused will. Many people, when they first start projecting, find themselves floating all over the place, bobbing up against the ceiling, stuck against the floor, being drawn off into an area that they don't know why they're being drawn off into that area. You're much like a toddler when you first start astral projecting. And what does a toddler do? A toddler has to continue to perfect their walking process so they can actually get it done properly. It's the same thing in the astral. You must be extraordinarily clear and your will must be focused as to where you want to go and what you want to do. If you lose your focus for a second, you could end up going to an entirely different place and time. So your concentration, your will must be extremely disciplined if you're going to travel in the astral and get anywhere near where you wish to go. That is my first Astral Club Q&A. I've got an enormous amount of other questions to get to, so I guarantee we will be having more of these. If you enjoyed this, if you want to support the cause of astral projection, then I ask you to like this video. I ask you to subscribe, and why don't you smash that bell button too? That way it makes sure that you're notified every single time that I do a video. I want to thank everyone for your support. Without your help and guidance and support and questions, I wouldn't have the energy and the focus to get this thing done. So thank you for helping me to grow this channel for the cause of astral projection for all. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye now.